What is a fugue? You said it's. I know Bach did a lot of them, right?
Yeah, he did. It's not a very tight form. It's kind of a loose form, but it generally has two sections. One is called the Exposition,
Wow.
and in the Exposition you have the introduction of the subject, and the subject is really this is kind of the crux of the fugue. It's like the subject at the opening, because the subject, a fugue will have a set number of voices. It could be 3, 4, or more voices. It's usually 3 or 4. And so the subject in the exposition, the subject will be heard typically in all of the voices one by one. So you'll hear it on its own in one voice, and then it will layer up. So then you'll hear it in the second voice, and then the first voice will have counter subject material. And then so on. So then you'll have it go in the third voice, and then the two previous voices will have. I can just play you an example. So subject, and then it gets repeated. Now we have 2 voices, and now we have 3 voices, and then the subject on the top. Right, so that forms the beginning of the exposition. So you have the exposition, and then you have what's called an episode. And an episode is the function of it is to provide relief from the counterpoint. So when you do that layering of the subject, it produces a lot of counterpoint, right? A lot of simultaneous melodies kind of happening at one time. And so it's very kind of dense. So the episode is a way to provide relief from that. So it'll often include like sequences and arpeggios and things like that. So in this fugue, the episode sounds like this. So it's like sequences, arpeggios. It's a little bit maybe easier listening than. Subject. So that's the exposition. And then the episode. Those are the 2 main sections of a fugue, and there are often also transitions that take you to and from both sections. There will usually be some sort of transition. So it's quite a loose form because you can have, episode. It always starts with an exposition, but after that it's pretty loose. You can go exposition, episode. You could have another episode. You could go exposition. You could have it just comprises of those 2 main sections. Other than that, it's quite loose. So sometimes you have very short fugues. Sometimes you have very long fugues. Yeah.
How did it come about? Like, who was there somebody responsible for inventing it, or?
Bach he didn't invent it, but I think he probably maybe like codified it. Like he made it into something that he wrote so many of them in a sort of a set way that he sort of made it into a fairly sort of codified form. But previously, the idea of I guess the main idea of a fugue is probably imitation. That different voices are imitating each other because they're repeating the subject one after the other, right? So you can hear imitation. And so imitation has been in music for a long time, has been around. The idea of voices, if you think of even Gregorian chant, for example, sometimes they they might imitate each other. One voice might sing a chant melody, and then another might imitate it. So the idea of a fugue, that imitation, has been around for a long time, and it gradually evolved through different forms, particularly in vocal music, that we have written records of. In vocal music, they used it. It's a pretty good device to use in vocal music. On instrumental music, though, it's quite complex. So, when you play, you think of Bach, like this was originally written on the violin, right? So, like playing that on 4 strings, that's crazy. So I think Bach maybe also pushed the threshold of like adapting that sort of vocal imitation, putting it onto a solo instrument. Could be the organ, it could be the lute, could be the violin, could be the cello. Although I don't think there are many fugues for cellos, but maybe there are. But so it has a vocal tradition, and then Bach kind of, you could say, made it an instrumental tradition, using it on instruments rather than voices. And also, he wrote so many of them that we can study them, and you can see that there are like he sort of set the norms, I guess you could say.
So it was originally a vocal tradition?
I'd say you could read a whole book on the history of the fugue, but it's just as a general summary, I'd say it definitely has origins from vocal music and imitation in vocal music.
This imitation and everything is more of a technique than a form. Would you say what's the form of a fugue? I don't know what a form of a fugue.
Yeah, it's a little bit loose. It just comprises of expositions and episodes that alternate. They usually alternate one after the other. That's probably it's not too set other than that. You just have exposition and then episode, and it just kind of usually just carries on that way. Exposition with the imitation and the subject, and then exposition, which would usually be a break from the imitation and from the subject. We could study let's look at a fugue. I think if I have my fugue, we could look at that. I wrote one actually for a class, so it's sort of like a textbook fugue.
Okay.
Because I wrote it for a class, because it's a textbook fugue, it's quite clear like how the sections work. It's quite short. It's just a couple pages. It's like on the short side for a fugue. So can you see that here?
I can see it. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So the subject. Now my fugue, because it's written for the guitar. So this is the other thing too. Like the guitar has a fairly limited range compared to a keyboard, like compared to an organ, for example. So I had to sort of compromise things a little bit. But that's the subject there. And then, so the subject now is repeated up here. And this you would call a counter subject or a counter melody. Probably a counter subject would be better in the bass.
So that's the subject right there. That's very nice. Very
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's the subject. Yeah.
And then this subject now is
yeah.
Oh, D sharp. D sharp, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
you might get more out of it actually if you read the voices individually. So if you read the subject on its own, so it's the subject has changed key.
So let me start again. Nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And so you looking at this, would you call that? Can you see how it's changed to an episode?
I call that elaboration. Is that what we call it?
Episode.
Episode. Okay.
Yeah, because it's arpeggios and sequences. There's no subject. You can't see the subject, present in there. Another function of the episode is to modulate, to change key. So, the exposition started in E, and then it went to the dominant to B, second part, the imitation, the second entrance of the voice of the subject. And so the episode starts in B, but then it ends in E. You can see the dominant. I'm using a B7. B chord here to bring you back to the subject in tonic, subject in E major again. So this is now the next exposition here.
Okay. So the episode, let me just write this down. The episode, usually or all the time, changes key?
I'd say I don't know what kind of percentage, maybe sometimes.
All right. Looks like a nice work. Could you play a little of it?
Yeah, I can send you a video too. I did a video of it.
Beautiful. Bravo. Bravo.
So that's the first exposition and first episode.
That's lovely. I like the chord changes that you went through with the episode there.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I could almost hear them. I could almost tell you what they were in a way.
Yeah.
Well, I see. Is that them? They're up there, right? That's
They're up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you went 4, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3. Beautiful. And that's in the key of B, the 5?
Yeah, it's in the key of B major, yeah.
Okay. Aha, I see the A sharp, yes.
Yeah.
What about those double sharps? Why are they double sharps there? F, so my witch was right.
Because F double sharp. So I could have written G natural, I guess. If we're in the key of G sharp minor, you would usually raise the leading tone. So F sharp isn't. You need to raise the F sharp up to make it a raised seventh. So the F sharp needs to become F double sharp in order to raise the leading tone to B sharp 7.
Uh-huh.
I think if you think on the fretboard, G sharp, Um, you think you're in the key of G sharp, and you need the leading tone, the sharp 7, which is so it's 1 fret down. So you could spell it as G natural, but that doesn't, that doesn't function right. You need to have, it needs to be an F of some type. It can't be an E. Sorry, it can't be a G. It has to be an F of some kind to be the leading tone, right? G, A, B, C, D, E, F.
Right.
So we need that F to be a semitone lower than the G sharp. So the only way to spell F a semitone lower than G sharp is F double sharp.
Gotcha.
That's a lot of I don't know if that makes sense. There's a lot of words for
What you're doing, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, so my view, let me go back to this, goes, oops. So there's the episode, and then here is another exposition. Now I have 3 voices, so I've introduced all voices after the first episode, which can also happen as well. So sometimes the exposition will introduce all voices. So this is a 3-voice view, but I only have 2 voices in the first exposition. So it's quite a loose form. That's basically, if you get anything out of it, it's a loose form, but it does have certain elements that are, that are always usually present, or always present. So exposition, 3 voices now. So except that I'm using a 4-voice chord here, so you have to. But it's 3 voices. You can see the 3 voices starting consistently. Starting here, so that you have this E is 2 voices, so you have 1, 2, 3, and then so you have this voice going like that, and then you have this voice going like that, and then you have the top voice doing its thing, right? So it's very it's contrapuntal, it's counterpoint, but the result here is sort of like, it seems like a series of chords. Anyway, 3 voices. I'll play it for you here so you can hear it.
Please.
And then it continues with 3 voices. Okay.
Beautiful.
So that's, yeah, three voice exposition now, exposition in 3 voices. The subject started in the bass here. I alter it a little bit at the end, and then it goes up into the goes up to the top voice there. And now we're in another episode here. So you can see the subject is not present, right? And it's lots of sequences, so lots of sequences. My episode here is modulating, right? You see the B sharp, so that's the leading tone of C sharp. So we're going to C sharp minor. How did I get there? Just by introducing the leading tone B sharp. That's
Love composition. How many compositions do you have, Daniel?
Not many. This is probably the only one that's sort of officially written down, and I would like to write more one day.
How did you think of it? Like, what was your process? Were you thinking the chord changes you like, or did you hear them in your head?
Partly improvisation to create material, and then I would sketch it out, and I had sketches of like different ideas and things, and then I just sort of weaved it all together from the sketches. But I had this general plan of going from exposition with voices and then episodes. That was my basic plan. I wanted to I wanted to go to the relative minor at some point as well. So I used this episode to modulate to the relative minor. So it goes into the relative minor, and then you're going to finish in the back in the major key again towards the end.
The relative minor, C sharp minor, yeah.
C sharp minor, yeah. Yeah. So C sharp minor, exposition, and so you can see the subject is, you have to transpose it into a minor key. So it sounds like this. Now I kind of did a weird thing, and the first half of the subject is in the low voice, and the second half sort of goes up high. That's kind of breaking the rules a little bit. You find when you compose stuff, you often have to bend the rules a little bit to just make it. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but I realized that I did that after I wrote my fugue. I'm like, this is the thing I was supposed to do, but I wanted to do this and just slightly bend it a little bit, and so I did that in a couple of places. So then you get the subject again in the low voice, but it remains in the low voice for the whole time. Minor. And then it goes down even further. What I wanted to do, the reason is because I think of minor keys as having a sort of a dark sound to them, so I wanted to keep the subject low because it kind of, to me, it just felt like the right thing to do. I guess you could think of like, I don't know, you could use some kind of analogy like heaven and hell or something, like the high major key angels up high, singing up high, and then the minor key down low, everything's low. Does it kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So I kind of did that. That's the minor key exposition from there to there, and then it goes into an episode. You can just see the writing changes, right? Like when you have the subject in there, it sort of has. And then the episode is just like it's just arpeggios and sequences. So I'll play the C sharp minor episode, and now the function of this is to also bring us back to E major too. So. Episode quite long so previous episodes were about 4 bars long. This one is much longer, and that's what I mean by it's a bit of flexibility. It's like the exposition could be 4 bars, it could be 8 bars, the episodes could be 4 bars, they could be 1 page long. There's no like limit to it, and sometimes Bach does that. Some of his fugues are very short, some of them are very long, like very, very long. So, modulates back to E. You can see how I did that quite quickly in this bar. All I did was I sort of created a B7 chord there. You can kind of see, can you see the notes? B7, yeah. There's B, A, D sharp, B there. So that's the dominant of E, so that brings you to E major. and this climbs up, say bringing you back to heaven maybe. And then here what I did is, this gets into composing, shows you a bit of, I guess, what you can do. This isn't working. Anyway, the subject, you look at these notes. They are the first three notes of the subject. So if we go back to the start, E, C sharp, B. So E, C sharp, B. And this is kind of some of the counter subject material that I used. Where is it? Here, it's kind of, it's a little bit dense, but like this kind of thing. That kind of gesture, or that kind of motive I use. So I'm kind of, in the episode now, what I'm doing, and this happens sometimes too, is that you could say like playing around with the material from earlier on. I'm sort of playing around with it a bit, like borrowing bits from the subject, borrowing bits from the counter subject, and creating something a bit different out of it. And then here again, the first three notes of the subject, E, C sharp, and B now in the bass. And this kind of sequence. Exposition, sort of. Well, the exposition is longer, so it's 3 bars plus 2 bars, so it's a little bit longer than just 4, but it's 6 bars long here. It's a little bit longer, so again, it's flexible. The expositions previously have just been 4 bars long, like this exposition was 4 bars, this was 4 bars, and so on. So this is a little bit longer. Subjects in the bass. There in the bass. I kind of stretch it out. So there's, in composition, there's something called augmentation and diminution. So augmentation is when this would be an example of augmentation. What I'm doing is I'm changing the note values so that those note values were originally quarter notes. Right? Okay. So augmentation would be making them into turning them into longer note values so they could show.
What's that called? Sorry, augmentation, you said?
Augmentation, yeah. AUGMENTATION. Like augment and an Asian. So that's augmentation. So I kind of did that here, like halfway in the subject. And so the opposite of that is called diminution, and that's where the note value's shorter than the original. So they'd be like in eighth notes, like. Yeah, if I did something like that. That would be diminution because it's that's in 16th notes. Yeah.
And you have this DIM
Dimi, like D-I-M-I,
right?
and then Nution, N-U-T-I-O-N.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So those are things you could use in your own improvising or composing, and they also occur in music quite a lot. Augmentation and diminution, because it's a way to something that composers like to do generally is create variety and unity at the same time. Variety and unity at the same time. So
Right.
devices like augmentation and diminution do that because you're using the same pitches but at different rhythmic values.
Got it.
Right.
Well, it's great. Now, when you studied this at your university level, so was this like undergraduate stuff or graduate stuff or doctorate stuff?
This was a graduate,
Right.
like a master's doctorate level. Yeah.
And when you studied this, did you have your instrument in hand, or was this just a dry, like, theory course?
No, this particular teacher just gave us flexibility, and we just studied a few of Bach's fugues, and then he just said, we're just going to do model composition. So most of the class was model composition, so writing or composing in a certain style, trying to kind of emulate or not necessarily copy, but copy the like have a template that you can use. So I used the template. I actually broke again. I bent the rules a little bit, and like I stretched like this episode is really long, for example. I wasn't supposed to do that necessarily, but I just did it because you can't really, like, when you're in the act of composing and improvising, you can't always put a boundary on it. You can't always like try and box it up. Sometimes you just have to let it happen, and I guess that's kind of what art is. I think in a way, it's partly. Letting the creative spark just take over and disregarding the rules a little bit. So I bent the rules a little bit with what I was supposed to do in quite a few ways. But yeah, so we just studied some fugues, and then we were asked to compose one, and it was a process. So like first we would write our subject, and then we would write an exposition, and then we would write an episode, and then so he would sort of check all of those things step by step, and then once we'd done that, I think we just sort of put them together and change keys and whatever, and yeah.
Very cool. How did you write that? Did you have Finale or one of those computer programs?
Sibelius.
Sibelius.
I wrote it by hand first. All the sketches and stuff were done by hand, and then I wrote like a final version by hand, and then I used Sibelius.
Well, that was fascinating. Is there a fugue that's an easy one in this?
Yeah, that's not really, because by nature of what the fugue is, by having the layers of voices and everything, there's just no easy fugue. They're all hard to play.
Wow. Well,
I tried to look for one. I tried to look for an easy fugue, and I couldn't.
There's no fugues in the Suzuki method at all?
I don't think so, no.
Wow.
Not even, I don't think even at the later, at the later grades, I don't think there's one.
Right.
So, But it's a good poem to know about, and it's a good poem to listen to as well. Teaches you a lot about the craft of composition, Michael Kraft, the craft of composition, because a composer can be you can really play around with the material, be crafty with the material, because it's all based on the subject and imitation, and as I kind of tried to show you what I did with playing around. It's like you can think of them like having different building blocks. You have the subject and the counter subject, and they're like building blocks that you can kind of play around with.